this work, and I'll talk about what I mean by this work, but let's start by really getting centered and grounded. Hopefully you haven't just done this, but can never do it enough, really. So I'm going to invite you to find a seat, or you can do this standing, actually. That can be really lovely if you've been sitting for too long. The important thing is to really feel all the places in your body that are touching down, right? So for me, my feet are on the ground, and so I'm like really working to get all parts of my foot like on the ground. I'm even pedaling a little right now just to feel the floor beneath me and to remind me of my lower body. My lower body is a really important resource, especially when I'm in an anxious moment or just to kind of like disconnected. So really invite you to do that. I'm going to turn on a song, a hymn or a hum rather, and have us sort of just breathe into it. I'll do a little bit of guiding as the song goes, but I just want us to take like really a few moments to drop in here so that we can all be maybe present in slightly similar register. So I tried this a moment ago and it worked. So let's try it again. So again, find your feet on the floor, find your butt somewhere held and maybe like make sure you feel it. And if you will, it feels nice to turn inward. So for many of us, that means closing our eyes. But if that doesn't feel good, you can always just face inwards. I'd also invite you to place your hands somewhere so they are also supported. That can be on a table in front of you, on your thighs, or a hand on the chest and on the belly are also really lovely. Some breaths and hear this beautiful There's no proper way to breathe, but really make sure that you are exhaling as long, if not longer than your inhale. Inhaling through the nose, exhaling however feels good to you. Maybe stirring, I know for me it brings up feelings in my chest, even a lump in my throat. Here's one, they're welcome. Extra love, a little bit of massage behind your skull, the exfoliative around your shoulders. Breathing in and out the whole time. As we are getting to the closing of this initial practice, I want to invite you to call in something that you feel grateful for right now. Hard time finding this. Breath is always a good one. Most of us can do it though. I really want you to look at how, or sense into how gratitude feels to you. Your body, not so much analytically. if you can, remember something that you're grateful for. Pocket if at any point you need something to help soothe you, your nervous system. And as you are ready, I want you to slowly open your eyes, but don't necessarily make contact. And if you want to turn your cameras on, it'll be a really lovely part of being together. But if not, I totally understand. And before we just like look at each other, I'm going to invite you to like have that gaze be a little blurry still, or like gentle, and just take a moment. Many of us are in our comfortable spaces, so it's not that necessary, but just take a moment to let your eyes scan around you, the room, looking over. I went left first, so I'm looking over my left shoulder. I'm coming slowly back. And I'm looking in the middle, and then I'm going over my right slowly, letting my eyes orient in a gentle way, helping my body to know, and you can come back now, helping my body to know on a visceral or a physiological level that all is well. The eyes, as many of you know, and I give this presentation not knowing where we all come from and what we already all know. Our eyes are, a very important part of our nervous systems, but they're often on alert for danger, or for those of us that are hypervigilant for the information that will troubleshoot and problem solve. And so we have to orient our eyes and let us know that in this space we can let down. Hopefully, that's the goal. So welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to be here on this beautiful spring Sunday. I'm in Carborough, North Carolina, the ancestral home of Saponi Okanichi and many other unknown tribes. And I just want to give gratitude today for them and for the land that I get to live on and garden on and love and teach on. And I was really unsure of how many of us were going to show up in this space. And it's always hard, right, to plan an hour-long thing where I want to get into my material, but it really helps me to know who's in this room. So I'm just wondering if, if we could just quickly go around actually and say our name and sort of what brings us to this discussion. Really briefly, I know that can't be super brief, and if you don't want to, please just decline. It helps me so much to get a sense. And this is something I really struggle with. One of the things that I hope that introduction opening sort of gave a sense of is that one of the main things that I think we need to do for transformative pedagogy in times of crisis, and I'll talk about the title in a bit, is to be like so gentle and loving and welcoming to our full selves. And a huge part of our full selves and our students' full selves is our bodies, right? And the heart is in the body. So I teach at a university, a Research One university, and in the United States of America. And my students are in a lot of pain and they don't know what to do for it. And so a lot of this work is really simply shifting an approach. And then there's my goal with this conversation, which is sort of talking about a taboo topic, I would say, in a Research One university, but is slightly becoming possible. And I actually am at the end of my semester. I just finished a class called Spirituality and Social Change, and it was my first time being brave enough to explicitly talk about that, even though I've been doing this work in subversive and hidden ways and for quite a while. That's just a tiny bit about me, and I'll talk plenty. So I was just hoping if we could, if that's all right, Nathan, is that allowed? Can I take the moment to, yeah, all right, great. So if we could just go, and also, Joao, do you want to introduce yourself, or are you busy translating? Is there anyone that needs English to Spanish translation here? I can't see. Oh, there's a message that's coming in. I'm not hearing it, but I don't need it. So yeah. Oh, was the song not audible to people? You could hear it. Some people could hear it. I'm sorry, Nathan. Oh, no, Nathan, you were just asking. Alyssa was asking. You were asking if she could hear it. Okay. I'm going to forget the chat. This is what happens on Zoom to me. I'm just like, woo, got derailed. All right. So if anyone would like to start by just saying, and your name, maybe where you're from, and then just like what brings you to this conversation, this particular panel today, and this Reimagining Education conference. All right, I see Alyssa. Would you like to start?
My name is Alyssa. I read the introduction on the schedule, and I'm a big fan of Joanna Macy. And Thich Naht Hanh, but Joanna Macy brought me here, so thanks for organizing. You're muted. Sorry. I'm going to pass.
And she's what brought me here too. She's the first person that got me on this work. So weird.
I don't know about you, but I find it helpful if I actually name someone. So I'm going to name Amor from Ireland. Do you want to go next?
Okay, so yes, I thought spirituality and social change, the two combined together. It was quite interesting. I don't know much about spiritual activism or anything. I never really been an activist. I had a Kundalini awakening, and for me, it's all about love, to do what you love, to love yourself. When you love yourself, you love the other, you find yourself in the other. And so I know my mission is I'm supposed to do something here. So I know that they're all, for me, it's like we're bringing heaven on earth, we're raising our vibration, that kind of thing. So I'm interested in how would you bring that to learning context? Thank you.
I'm just going to add one little question in there. If you do teach in a context and you want, just let me know. I would just love that. Would help me because I teach at a university.
Yeah.
Curious. Yeah.
No, I am an unschooling mom, and I would like to have a democratic school. And I'm wondering if my problem is self-doubt, really, or self-confidence, or being brave enough to find other people to do it. I find that it's very hard to find people that are on the same vibe as you to work and be able to work well together.
Great. Anyone else would like to go?
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm in Muskogeland, Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. And I teach a garden program on site at a women's prison. And I'm just like so delighted with, what you're bringing today and all of the influences, and feel a lot of resonance. So thanks.
Thank you. Michal, please.
Hi, hello, I'm Michal. I'm just thinking it's going to be dark here at 10 p.m. because we have load shedding. I'm in South Africa, in Cape Town. And so I teach at the university in political ecology. And I've been in your session with Arturo Escobar in a session, I think it was a Dutch university that arranged it. I forget the third person, so I'm really love that. Inspired by the Restoring the Relationality book. I hope it's out soon. Yeah, and I have been experimenting with breath work and grounding students, mostly in the postgraduate class because it's small, and even sometimes during COVID when I had to do my online videos. And so yes, I'm here to learn, I guess, and share. Thanks.
Anyone else want to share with me? Especially if you have specific things you want me to cover. That was very helpful. Oh, Mona, thank you for what's in my current study program. Yeah, if you want to do it in the chat, you're reminding me about the potentials in Zoom. I completely forgot about that aspect, of course.
Yeah, my name's John Gold. I teach at Drexel University. I teach doctoral students in transformational leadership. And the idea of spirituality is kind of interesting because I get them to think about Chardin, and I get them to think about Thomas Berry and Otto Scharmer's divide of the spiritual divide. So I integrate that in because they need to think about that stuff as developing leaders.
Beautiful, beautiful. All important influences to me as well. So that's great. Very exciting. Anyone else want to share? Maybe we'll just take a couple more just for the sake of time, and then hopefully people can. And I'm also just doing this now before I forget, because this is, this is a moment in time. I'm going to put a a chat here that is just a blank Google Doc. And if you want to add anything there, questions, or to be in touch with later, your email, and just contact me later, we can all be in touch. I would be really grateful. That's one of the things I'm really looking for is community of practitioners that are interested in developing this. I've had some at my university, but definitely could use some more, especially people that are really into like getting out of the standard model of education, right? A lot of us are blinded by what the parameters are. Wow, I'm an autonomous institute called Latin American Thought. Babalao, I love it. Perfect. Perfect. Anyone else would like to share where they're from, what they want? Yes, Devin.
I am a first grade teacher. I'm in Ithaca, New York. I just, sort of obsessively for 2 years have been like looking basically for this conference without knowing exactly what I was looking for. And to me, the more I think about it, the more I listen to people, it just feels like on this earth, we have all these systems and violence driven by fear. And we have all this wisdom rooted in love and compassion and oneness. And it's really a matter of, taking the knowledge and wisdom we have and figuring out how to pass it on to younger people and to future generations. And there's, that's a puzzle because our school systems are very far from being ready to do that. So I'm really interested in finding ways to maybe circumvent the school systems and try to get conversations started among young people and start transmitting wisdom to them directly, because I'm losing faith that educating a bunch of teachers is realistic. But yeah, I'd love to collaborate. So
yeah, Devin, my daughter is in kindergarten and I am freaking out. So in public school here in North Carolina. So thank you. I'm your hero. Okay. Anyone else want to share anything? Hi, Danielle. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Danielle, and I am in Ontario, Canada. I am a high school teacher. I teach English, and just generally, especially speaking of times of crisis and post-pandemic life, I see a lot of despair in young people. And prior to the pandemic, we were pushing a lot of dystopian literature, and I myself was engrossed in a lot of that. And it's really hard to fall in love with the possibility of the future and the land on which we all live that we are a part of. It's really hard to encourage that among young people when they're sitting in despair, and I see the despair on their faces. They're bored, they're disengaged, they lack meaning. And so I want to offer something different, a new story to them. And so I find working with those who are also like-minded and doing the same help to give me courage in kind of disrupting these spaces that confine us all. I find that the institution of education doesn't sit well on my shoulders. And so I like to remind myself of that important work of ways showing within. And I'm lacking the ability to stay within the system. And I think it's really important for people to be way showing in conventional spaces too. So I'm happy to be here and happy to learn from all of you.
Thank you. I actually really love that you mentioned the word despair, and I am going to talk a little bit more about it. And I see Michael and Todd, and we're going to get you all to introduce yourselves. And then I want to talk a little bit more of the work and give an offering. But one of the offerings for me, a tool that has become increasingly useful to me in, someone's not muted, I don't know where it is. So just there's a feedback. Useful to me in this work is poetry. And so on that, what you just said, Danielle, I just want to share a poem that actually is the beginning of our new book on restoring life. That's hopefully going to come out at some point in the near future. But it's from a young climate change activist named Aisha Siddiqa. Some of you might have heard this poem already. It's called, on another panel about climate, they asked me to sell the future, and all I've got is a love poem. What if the future is so soft and revolution is so kind that there is no end to us in sight? Whole cities breathe and bad luck is bested by a promise to the leaves. To withstand your own end is difficult. The future frolics about, promised to no one, as is her right. Rage against injustice makes the voice grow harsher yet. If the future leaves without us, the silence that will follow will be an unspeakable nothing. What if we convince her to stay? How rare and beautiful it is that we exist. What if we stun existence one more time? When I wake up, get out of bed, my 7-year-old cousin with her ruptured belly tags along. Then follows my grandmother, aunts, my other cousins, and the violent shape of their drinking water. The earth remembers everything. Our bodies are the color of the earth, and we are nobodies. Been born from so many apocalypses. What's one more? Love is still the only revenge. It grows each time the earth is set on fire. But for what it's worth, I'd do this again. Gamble on humanity 100 times over. Commit to life unto life as the trees fall and take us with them. I'd follow love into extinction. Yeah, that poem, like, kind of, I cry pretty much every time. And I think one of the things that I do want to speak to, and it's become an increasingly important part of my toolkit for transformative pedagogy, and then Michael and Todd, I want to come to you, is the despair. And this is a very big lesson that Joanna Macy gifted us with, or is gifting us with currently still, is that we can't avoid it. Like, so much of our work, we're like, okay, let's not let them get despair. Let's like make it either happy, or let's like pretend it's not in the room, right? And one of the things that I think is so profound, and I've worked with this for many years now, and so I feel like I have no evidence, no evidence-based research yet, but to acknowledge our pain for the world, to acknowledge our despair at this moment, and our young people, we have the capacity. As Joanna Macy would say, your heart, if you're afraid that your heart will break open, don't be. Your heart is made for this. If it breaks open, it can hold the whole universe. It is that large. And so one of the things that I offer, and one of the things I can, if anyone's interested, and I was going to maybe do this practice, and we can decide together if we want to do another practice together, is she has this beautiful practice called breathing through. And it's basically almost a version of Tonglen, for those of you who are familiar with the Buddhist practice of like breathing in the world's pain and breathing out love. But it's also actually just inviting us to acknowledge the pain that we all live in just by being here. And when you start classes, or when you acknowledge that in a university or another institutional setting, something changes. And yes, it can hurt for a bit, right? Like, people need to have some support and resources and trust. But I really want us to not fall into the trap that so many people are so scared of not like touching despair. So I just wanted to name that. And Michael and Todd, sorry for, yeah.
I can go first. Too much to say on the topic of transformative pedagogy and times of crisis, but in terms of your description, along with Joanna Macy, I saw the name Parker Palmer there, which I was a student at Swarthmore College in late 60s, early 70s, and I first heard that name, and I think he was involved with Pendle Hill, which was a walk in the woods from us, and that brought that back to me. And I've taught at a bunch of institutions, including Swarthmore. I retired from teaching in 2015.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And yes, Parker Palmer, if I get to my slides, I have some quotes of his, but I'm also not committed. I'm not attached at this point to anything. Okay. I've had a lot of stuff to offer.
I'll detach from that.
Yeah. Todd.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for opening the space for things other than positivity. I mean, I love positivity, and everybody is so happy in this conference, but I think it is really important to really do acknowledge the despair and the grief and the anger. And I come to this this workshop and many others in this conference in a space of activism, and I'm a textbook case for just being traumatized by my education. I'm a member of the Debt Collective. I have $134,000 of debt, and I'm in strike, and I refuse to pay any of that back. My philosophy is based on Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and I've worked extensively with the Debt Collective to obtain justice for people all over the United States and beyond. So I come to this space with a lot of curiosity, but also a lot of hurt, anger. I've been a debt exile for 10 years. I haven't been back to the US in 10 years. And I'm curious to learn what are the ways that I can heal myself so that I can be more helpful to the people around me and heal others. Thank you for giving me this space.
Yes. And thank you so much for your honesty and your vulnerability. And I actually just want to really, like, if I were to, to put it, one of our like key mantras has to be, for us to do this work to help educate, quote unquote, others and teach in this way, we have to heal ourselves. Like, it is such a huge thing. And I think one of the reasons, and I am going to pull up some slides, and then I will get carried away. I am a professor, right? So like, just raise hands, speak over me, get me to shut up, ask for a practice. But I wanted to start a little bit about where this work comes from. And I also started as an activist, and then, I've always been 1 foot in, 1 foot out of academia in some way, but partly because I want to harness the resources of thought and thinking about how to live in this crazy world, right, in a way that our dominant ways of thinking haven't allowed for. And I also found a lot of pain and unprocessed pain in activist spaces that led me to sort of start studying a wing of spiritual activism that was emerging in the aftermath of the alter globalization movement in the US Social Forum and global aspects of it. And there was a lot of attention to what people actually talked about getting out of the spiritual closet, and also about the nervous system, right? And nervous system isn't a way to talk about things that doesn't do the alarm bells of the woo-woo spiritual stuff. And it is also most people I know that start that path are going to end up getting woo-woo. I mean, not really. You don't have to be woo-woo. You just have to believe that there's something bigger to us than, spirit. So, and thank you so much for the quotes and the stuff in the chat. If I don't keep up and there's something important there that someone else sees, please bring it up. I'm going to share my screen here. And this is part of what drives me crazy about sharing my screen, is then I can't see you all. And so I'm going to just do it and then hopefully stop sharing at some point too. Oh, I forgot to do slideshow while I did that. I haven't done this in so long, y'all. The Zoom. Why is it not? Someone want to help me? There we go. No, not presenter view, because then escape. Sorry, everybody. I should be better at this. All right. So we've mentioned Joanna Macy several times already, and I just wanted to put up her beautiful face. She is in her late 90s now. Correct me if I am, Alyssa, if I've even lost track. I met her the first time in 2011, and she was in her 80s then. I think she was 84 then. So I could do the math, but I'm not going to interrupt myself to try. And, she writes, the most remarkable feature of this historical moment on Earth is not that we are on our way to destroying it. We've actually been on our way for quite a while. It's that we are beginning to wake up from a millennia-long sleep to a whole new relationship to our world, to ourselves and each other. And in 2011, I started teaching a class with my mentor and co-author Arturo Escobar called Social Change in Times of Crisis. So this started way before, COVID, although I think it's become more resonant during COVID, the idea of times of crisis. And I just want to put up this spiral, right? And I'll go into the sources of inspiration for this work, of which there are many, but Joanna Macy definitely is foundational. For me, I was going through a really, really hard time. I finished my dissertation and I was pretty disillusioned with both activism and academia at that moment. I was in a true depression, although I didn't think I would have named it as such at the time. And she really welcoming our hard emotions, right? Or our dark emotions, as Buddhism might call it. And one of the things she says is, start with gratitude always. We always can be grateful. And that practice, I will say, with students is so helpful. I always so one of the things I was doing with y'all is kind of modeling how I would start. And that would be one of my first centering practices. I start every single class with at least one centering. Some of them I teach in 3-hour versions and then 50-minute lecture classes. So it really varies. But I always take that time. And as long, people are always like, but I have so much content. If you do this, your content will go so much more. And again, I'm talking in a university setting. I apologize to those who are not, and you'll help me think about how to make this relevant, hopefully. But then she really talks about honoring our pain for the world so that we can not, so much energy is used in protecting ourselves. And I think that's actually a much underrated aspect of what is going on in our society right now. We are numbed people. We are numbed. Many of us are choosing to numb ourselves because it feels like we cannot handle it. And I will be honest, we cannot handle it all by ourselves all the time. So we do need to pick and choose. We do need coping mechanisms, but we also need to be able to soften our hearts and let it in measured and resourced ways. So she started doing this work with environmental activism activists, especially those that were looking at nuclear devastation originally in the 70s. But it is profound what it allows for in ourselves to heal. But you do have to, we will fall apart a little bit first, right? And that's one of the things that we need support for, because in a late modern capitalist white supremacist society, you can't fall apart, right? That's part of so we need each other to help create spaces and modalities for doing it. Then she talks about seeing with new eyes and going forth. And that spiral has been a very important model for me of doing, of thinking about that as I teach courses, but also just like, even within, you know, a session, right? So I just put this here as a really lovely poem that invites us to think of all of ourselves and all of our parts as welcome. This is a poem by Rumi that many of us might know. This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, I think. Yeah, I've read this poem enough times, I couldn't see it. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond, right? And one of the things that I will say in terms of like what I think spirituality allows for, and unfortunately, I won't be able to talk as much about the book as I would love to. If anyone else would like to talk to me about it at some point, please shoot down your email and I'll email you and we can start a conversation, maybe set up another time to talk Zoom-wise. But one of the big things about the concept of relationality, right, is that there is no such thing as good or bad. There is no such thing as darkness without light or vice versa, right? So relationality is the mutual interdependence of all that is. The way that Thich Nhat Hanh would talk about this is that interbeing, that is interbeing, things inter-are. And so much of modern Western thought like is a sort of linear, progressivist, and I would say what like leftist thought too. It's a big does this a lot. And so when we have the bad, we want to get out of it, instead of understanding that the seeds of the good come in relationship to the hurt, to the bad, to the wounds, right? So we have to really start embodying that. And that's a really big and hard task, given how we've been socialized and taught to avoid all of those things. And I would also say it's about not attachment to what you were like, everyone wants to be happy. That's a very misguided understanding of spiritual, like new age spirituality, I think. Like the being with what is what we're going for, is the capacity to be present with what is. And as we grow our individual capacity for presence, one of my big beliefs is that we grow a collective capacity for presence. And as we get collectively, there's like a resonance that happens. And so as we get these skills, you don't individually need to be able to hold it all, right? We can help do it collectively. And that's it's like a shift, right? It's like not a shift, that's not the word I'm looking for. It's like an upgrade can happen at that point. My mouse is not working. So one of the things, and this is, I won't spend too much time doing this because we are already past halfway. I need to keep my time. But one of the things that is really, really important is to have good ground rules that you establish whenever having any of these conversations, because things will come up, right? For people, emotions will come up, and not everyone is ready for having all these things. A graduate student, my TA the other day just told me, she's like, some days when you do your centering, Dr. O, I don't want to do it because I'm not ready. I don't have the space at that moment to like really be with what is. And I was like, that's beautiful, beautiful noticing, right? Like, so in our community agreements, you name these things in the space, first of all, because it really allows for sharing. And I think all of us in here are probably like, yeah, go on, because you know this stuff. But this idea of taking care of ourselves, really like taking care of ourselves. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute is taking care of our nervous systems, which means knowing our nervous systems, which is a big piece of like emergent knowledge that I think really helps with spiritual work. Because if you don't understand when you are triggered, when you don't understand that you're not present, but you think you're present because you're doing the hardest thing, you're willing yourself there, you can't do anything. And you can't teach anyone in that window because the cortex is just shut down. It's overwhelmed. So, yeah, so some quote. Ooh, I did not mean to skip ahead. I'm trying to move the faces so I can read the slides, but it's not working for me so well. So, these are just some quotes about my understanding of education and some of my inspirations. So the Zapatistas, since the mid-90s, have been just like such an important teacher for me personally about what it looks like to change the world. And this is one of my favorite quotes of theirs, where they say, to change the world is very difficult, if not impossible, but we can build new ones. right? We can build a new world in which many worlds fit. And the idea is that we are building worlds, right? Like Western modernity wants us to believe realism is all that we've got right here. And I don't believe that to be true. I think we are making worlds in the stories and the communities and the ways and the truths that we tell. And this is a very similar, but like sort of the other side of it. It comes from Jack Halberstam. Sorry, I don't know why they are not listed here, but just like, when we start changing things, we can't possibly know what's going to come next. So like being present with what is, letting things fall apart, and like, you know, seeing and feeling differently and starting to get to know ourselves enough to be able to notice that. You know, these are some more specifics about education. And here's one of my Parker Palmer quotes. So bell hooks and Parker Palmer, really important. And I want to recommend to anyone, I'm like dying to get this book reissued. I only have it from the library because there are no copies, but it's called The Heart, I can't even get it on the screen, The Heart of Learning, Spirituality and Education. And this was a collection that came out of a conference at Naropa in 1999. And I don't know what happened to that set of people that were doing those conversations, but we need them again. And they really just point out that there is no such education if you're not speaking to the soul and the spirit of a person, right? So the idea, especially again in like higher education, I get laughed at a lot of times when I talk, and I've started to be strong enough and healed enough for that to be fine with me. But I like, you know, not have a job in a few years. That's very possible. So I don't want to go too fast. I'm also happy to share these slides. So if anyone again found that link, the Google link, I'm happy to share stuff. And I think that maybe the Reimagining Education can put you in touch with me. I did want to read this quote though from Rachel Noah Merriman, who is, she's a doctor actually, and she teaches doctors. She's also someone who has suffered from Crohn's for much of her life and was told that she would never live past her 30s. And she's a beautiful elder who teaches doctors about compassion and about becoming healers. And she had this beautiful, beautiful quote that I just want to share with you. Of all the contemporary cultural institutions, education holds the greatest promise of healing the wounds of the cultural shadow. So that's an important concept for me, our cultural shadow. In some ways, education has historically held this responsibility. Educare, the root of the word education, means to lead forth the hidden wholeness, the innate integrity that is in every person. And as such, there is a place where to educate and to heal mean the same thing. I just want to say that again. To educate and to heal can mean the same thing. Educators are healers. Educators and healers both trust in the wholeness of life and in the wholeness of people. Both have come to serve this wholeness. Now, as educators, though, we cannot heal the shadow of our culture by educating people to succeed in society as it is, right? And that's such an important thing, right? Because, and this is where activism comes in, right? Like people have to understand that we live in a story or a culture of capitalism and white supremacy and that is the shadow, right? So part of what we are struggling with is like people think progress, modernity, development, economic growth, all these things are sort of good things. So how do we, a lot of people live that way thinking that, but the shadow of all of those things, right, is colonialism, is racism, is patriarchy, is disconnection from our souls, is disconnection from one another, right? And so they aren't separable, they are co-constitutive. Right. And this is one of my big things. So I teach I teach about globalization. That's like my big intro, 200 students. I'm very lucky. I still love that class at this point, 200 students a semester. And there's like light bulbs going off, but I also do the centering with them in an auditorium of 200 and they love it. Not all of them will admit it, but many of them do. Michael, you have your hand up. Is it still up from just before, or do you want to ask something? You're good. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to get here and then I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and check in, and then we might do some more practices. Okay. So I started doing this work called Transformative Pedagogy in Times of Crisis. Actually, I would say I named it the year of COVID, right? But I had taught courses and written about social change in times of crisis for a decade at that point. And so transformative pedagogy for me is a combination, right, of the social change and theoretical frameworks that come out of activist theory and activist work, but also people like bell hooks and Paulo Freire. It comes out of a huge tradition of contemplative practices, generally speaking, but specifically as applied to education. And there's like a nice body of work. And I'm going to share some of that in a second. a big piece for me, and I mentioned this a moment ago, has been the growing understanding of how trauma informs our lives, right? And we use the word trauma in some senses as shorthand for the nervous system, but I also do come from a school of thought that believes we live in a trauma-filled society. Certain people are much more victims of acute instances of trauma, but overall, given the level of violence, what's happening to our climate, all that we live through, we are all in some senses living through trauma-filled, right? And so we have to understand how that impacts us. And what I was talking about earlier, the numbing, the need to numb, that is one of the like telltale signs of trauma, right? Is that you just can't. It feels like too much. The work that reconnects, as I mentioned, has been there all along, and I have just been naming it more and more. So the work that reconnects comes from Joanna Macy, and then social movements and social change imaginaries. So that is like what I like the stew from which I'm deriving a lot of these ideas. I have some more quotes from bell hooks, who passed in 2020, along with Thich Nhat Hanh within a couple of weeks, two of my biggest like inspirers, is that the word? And so I'll just read her quote here just because she needs to be recognized. To educate is the practice of freedom, is a way of teaching that anyone can learn. That learning process comes easiest to those of us who teach, who also believe that there is an aspect of our vocation that is sacred, who believed that our work is not merely to share information, but to share in the intellectual and spiritual growth of our students. To teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. And the other thing that bell hooks talks about, and I don't think I'm going to get to the quote because I have many too many quotes. I'm like such a nerd. Is just talking about how we have taught educators, especially in college. I don't know about elementary and high school, but I fear that there's so much as the case, to not show their full vulnerable selves. Like, you're supposed to come in as if you're all together all the time, no matter what's going on. You're actually a robot, really. And all you care about is them getting their work done. Even if you're like dealing with an ill one at home, your child, like whatever's going on. And so what she points out is not only is that ridiculous, but also one of our ways of being educators is to model. It's resonance. It's like showing up as you are healing and healed, because we're all on the path, we're all in process, no one's there yet. That invites them in to doing that work. But if you are a robot, that's not going to happen, right? Let me see if there's a last quote I can end with here, because my computer is not cooperating. I also want to just point to this idea of wellness and self-recovery that she really emphasizes. There's so much I could talk about. This I would say she's probably the key, like the main, I actually say that and then maybe not, because there's so many people, but the idea that taking care of ourselves, and Audre Lorde says this as well, an act of wellness and self-recovery is an act of resistance, right? And so, yes, there are a lot of debates out there about self-care being bougie and being, self-obsessed or whatever. And I can see there are versions of it, but I also don't think that's true ultimately, because also when you're doing your work of caring for yourself and coming into an understanding of the way these systems have harmed you, it's one of the only ways to get to a place where you can help your students do that too. Another Palmer and bell hooks quote, but I'm going to actually stop here for a second and just check in on any questions. I haven't been able to check in the comments. Yeah, great. People are doing quotes. That's awesome. Anyone have a question at this point? Because I see that we only have 12 minutes left, which is why I'm like, okay. I'm used to doing like 2 to 3 hour things, FYI. That's one of my shortcomings in doing an hour-long presentation. Any questions, thoughts?
Could I?
Yes, please. Jakayla?
Jakayla, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll keep it brief. Well, I wanted to say that I think that as an educator, especially a special educator, in a urban neighborhood full of Black and brown children, when you said that to educate is to heal, it deeply resonated with me. And I think that within that role, especially how children who have disabilities are looked at in America in this context, how they're pathologized. And I had to leave a master's degree program because my professors they were kind of blind to their own biases. And all the books were written by
white men.
Yes, I used to the words out of my mouth.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't function in this environment.
No, you
like,
can't.
When I talk to people, they don't know that I used to be a special education student my damn self. So it's like, I have a unique perspective about it, having it out and having navigated trying to be yourself in a world that tells you have to mask all the time. So there's that. And the other thing I wanted to throw in the pot is that something I've learned along my journeys, I'm only 23, but something I've learned on my journey so far is that people heal themselves. That the egotistical mind can make you feel like you're doing the healing within a course or a workshop or a program or whatever it is. I have other thoughts about how spirituality has been so commodified and like capitalized. That's a whole culture of people, almost like predatory people, preying on those who are trying to open up that path within themselves. And just the word surrender comes to mind, surrendering the ego as a teacher, as anyone who's holding space, and as anyone who's seeking to use your gift for a positive impact on the world, surrendering the ego. And in terms of healing, I almost wish we had other words to describe it, because the word heal almost denotes like a broken bone or something. Like, I had to expand my vocabulary. And even as a poet, I appreciate your poetry as well. I had to open myself up to different understandings and other languages of healing, because the way in which people view it in this society, it just feels very objectifying, like you're trying to fix yourself like a project or something. And that language just does not work for me. So I appreciate you for sharing, for being very self-aware. It's not very many people are aware of the white supremacist framework or even like give voice to it. So I'm always very surprised when folks are open to sharing it. I'm in Florida right now, and if you're in the US, you know how live it is in Florida. So
it's getting like that in North Carolina too. So that's where I am. Yeah.
I thank you for being present and for all the work that you've been doing within your chosen field of profession. I know everybody has their role, but I always give credence to everyone who chooses to play their role and do it to the best of their ability.
Thank you so much for speaking all of those things. Yeah, and there's so much I can say about, so one of the reasons why this, like I named liberatory pedagogy as the number one thing, is that this work came out of trying to teach about anti-oppression and capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, and recognizing that we need these other tools to do that. But I also think that what you pointed out is so important, like the folks that are just doing the spiritual work and the woo-woo, and they're not being present with like the dominant culture and its white supremacist and patriarchal premises, blind spots, as you pointed out, like can't actually be present with what is, right? So a big part of all of my classes is dealing with white supremacy and whiteness and the white culture and what it makes us blind to. And I can't find the quote at this moment, but James Baldwin's notion of, the class I just finished was Love and Liberation, Spirituality and Social Change. And one of the key quotes is James Baldwin's, like, if we're ever going to end racism, white people are going to have to learn how to love each other and love themselves. Then maybe we won't have racism, because racism has nothing to do with people of color. Actually, it has to do with an illness, or what Ruby Sales called spiritual malformation of racism. And if people want references, there's a lot of great texts on that stuff. But noticing our makeup is really important work. So thank you so much. And healing, it's an interesting, I gave the link for, not link, but the citation for that Remen piece, which talks about education as healing, because that was like the biggest light bulb, because I had been doing so much healing work, and then to name myself as a healer was so helpful. And I do think Toni K. Bambara has a short set of short stories, The Salt Eaters. And she has this beautiful, if I could find that segment. Oh, thanks for drawing. Oh, I love this. Beautiful segment about what healing is. And she was also one of the inspirations for Sisters at the Yam for Bell Hooks. So if you haven't read the Toni, you might have already read it, of course. But I do want to hold on to healing. And we just have to actually get people to realize that what white people or white supremacist Western modern culture thinks of is curing and fixing, not healing, because healing is not linear like that. And it's not about fixing. It's about restoring the inner wholeness that is all of our birthright. And anyway, sorry, my soapbox there. Joao.
First of all, thank you so much, because I was a little bit like textually, and I was sending a lot of other things in the chat, because I think we are connecting the path that we are investigating right now. So I would like to keep in contact, because one thing that you said, and Jacqueline said, that to me it's so potent. There is an author who invented the category of Mac mindfulness as a way to...
One more time?
Mac mindfulness, like McDonald's, but with mindfulness.
Right.
So to get those, like the inner impossibility to heal by ourselves, just by ourselves, without healing community, sounds to me that is one of the keywords of paradigm changes. That just, for example, if a lot of people who are from Latin America who are in this space, we have been doing some underlying ground conversations about how sometimes it's difficult to us to listen some ways of interpreting what is happening in the epistemological approach that came from Abya, because sometimes the point is that, like, it's not sacred just to build an altar and started to change your name or do some kind of inner connection with the otherness, but how can you really be true with the cheat things that are going on, and be able to find common grounds to flourish from this cheat? So
say that word cheat, the word cheat, like cheating?
Cheat, like
shit?
The word cheat, like poo-poo.
Mierda.
Yeah. So I thank you, because I think it's one of the emergent discussion of the moment. So I thank you to give a moment, a little bit accelerate because of the time. I'm really grateful that I didn't have to translate that, because I would be without any brief right now. But really, thank you to be able to share all of that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I also love the perspectives, right? Like, it's so important that we break up the modern Western Eurocentric and English lens. For those who are not familiar with the work of Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams and Lama Rod Owens, there is a book called, I have it right in front of me, I hope. I don't have it right in front of me. Radical Dharma is the name of the book, but also there's a lot of great stuff online of theirs. And they really name why we need spiritual work for social justice and social transformation in a white supremacist society in particular. They're both Black Buddhist leaders, and they're also queer identified and really phenomenal teachers. And so I really recommend their work, and I have a ton to recommend. I see that we are at 4:30. So I'm just trying to think of what's a nice way to close. yeah, it feels very undone in some ways, which is, you know, obviously what's going to happen when we start talking about this. But I didn't think of a good closing practice. That's really interesting.
Next week at the same time.
7. Yeah, we could just meet next week. This is not the best time for me. One thing I will offer, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw up one last slide, but it was just some practices that people can take with them. And again, I'm trying to get a website. Like that's one thing that I'm dedicating this summer to, is just trying to get these material accessible to a community of folks that aren't necessarily at my institution, and that we can maybe be in conversation. But you know, the idea of a Sabbath is a really important one that I have started to embrace. And so Saturdays, I am of Jewish origin. I'm Israeli, actually, which we could talk a whole lot about. I am an anti-Zionist Israeli, but that's a whole other topic. But the practice also to model for our students of like taking pause, taking time, not staying so busy that you do not have time to feel what you need to feel, to collapse, to sleep, to love, right? Like to have all the feelings and to take care of your body, right? So generally speaking, I am not online on Saturdays. That's my thing. I do celebrate the Sabbath, and I have friends or community members over, and we light candles and eat and celebrate, and then take that day. But it doesn't have to be from the Jewish tradition. The Sabbath is like, someone talked about holy envy once, and they're like, I want that, you know, I want to take these things from these other traditions. And that's what I crave. So I don't do next week, but please do sign that list. And I am totally excited if we all want to stay in touch, or those of us who do want to stay in touch, we do find a time, maybe not on the set.
It's blocked the list. Maybe.
Oh, I fixed it. Check it again. Please, hopefully, yeah, I see people writing now. I don't know. I thought I had fixed it the first time, and apparently my children, that was ridiculous. My students make fun of my Luddite capacities on the internet all the time. Yeah, we're at 4:31. I know they told us we could take a couple of moments. So I want to just actually, let's do something a little different. Let's just stand maybe. I really do want to honor the body and those of us who've been at this conference for a couple of days or even just today. I will just say that yesterday I had a lot of fun in my longer seminar class, and we did a lot of body stuff, but really just taking a moment to find the center on your feet. And I find center actually sometimes, and this is really good for young kids and also even for teenagers and college age students, is the sitting that a lot of our spiritual traditions, which I will name, is a very small part of actual spiritual practices in Buddhism. Reverend Kyoto Williams always points out how the white people that brought it here have taken like a small portion of what actually constitutes those practices and loved it. And we love sitting because we don't want to talk about stuff and we don't want to welcome the body. So take a moment to feel your feet on the ground, and I'm going to like sway. I'm going to shift my weight from one foot to the other. And I'm actually going to start like moving my hands slowly at first. And then maybe like really take a moment to just let your body discharge. One of the most important wisdoms, I feel like, of our newfound understandings of the way that trauma and our nervous systems work is having watched animals, right? And so animals in the wild don't experience trauma. They experience hard experiences, but they don't get traumatized. Because have you ever gone, like a dog is having an aggressive moan and they go, so it's like we need to be able to not be so self-conscious that we don't let our bodies. So I make my 200 students do silly things like this, and sometimes they look at me like I'm crazy, but a few of them told me they were grateful yesterday. So yeah, so just shake those hands. You can even like take a little bit of stuff off of them, shake it off, do your head, your neck, your shoulders. I'm going down my legs as well. And then maybe we can just take a moment. And if your camera is on, take a moment, palms forward or palm on your hand, on your chest, and see the people that we are here together with. The other big part of our shadow of white supremacist capitalist modernity is that we think we are individuals, and there is no such thing. We just aren't. So one of the ways we can remember that is by looking at each other, smiling, really taking a moment to take the folks that are here in. I'm so grateful to have been able to be here with you for this last hour. Thank you so much. And let's please do stay in touch. This is work that I've been trying to figure out for at least 20 something years, creating education outside of the traditional university, but also feeding the university with more healing practices. So thanks all for being here.